Okay, David, so tragically, 10 people were murdered in Buffalo by a white kid with a long gun. Now, the kid leaves a 180-page manifesto outlining, quoting Tucker Carlson's racist replacement theory propaganda. And yet Tucker Carlson still seems like he's bulletproof. I mean, his show remains that one of the top cable news shows in the country. I mean, what if anything can stop him?
You know, the show reflects the fact that there are people out there who want to hear his swill, right? And his swill has been racist in the past. You know, it's automatically, reflexively anti-Biden, anti-Democrat, anti-liberal. I mean, it's, you know, his appeal in a lot of ways is like Trump's appeal initially in 2016, when people, you know, whether they even thought he was going too far, they wanted an angry SOB who would kick, you know, the liberals in the teeth, you know, be distinctly, you know, anti-politically correct, which in my view means anti-decent. And they just wanted to rally behind somebody who was a bastard. And Tucker gets up there and he feeds, you know, a lot of people's worst fears, paranoia, grievances, that the world is out to get you, the forces are arrayed against you, and whether it's the business world, the media, the academia, and of course the, you know, Democrats, and they're all out to get you and to change the world. Now, I understand why people feel like that, but this easily bleeds into racism, right? It's not that they're just out to get you; they're helping the people with brown skin and black skin. They care more about them than they care about you. They want to bring in these immigrants. They want to bring in these immigrants to replace you or to get votes for them so they can, you know, continue their crusade against you. You know, it just keeps bleeding. This is like not a dark line or hard and fast line that he crosses or that Trump crossed in some ways. It's all just kind of moves from one mad as hell perspective into something deeper and darker, and, you know, and in this case, in a lot of cases, racist. So there's Tucker out there doing his angry man bullshit, and it's, you know, it's they're after boys, it's COVID, and it's, you know, critical race theory, you know, gay marriage, and it's taking white people out of the picture and caring more about black people. And so it's all part of his shtick, and there's nothing surprising about it. And I don't see why Fox at this point would change anything about this. As long as he's getting viewers, they're going to stick with him. It's, you know, they haven't gotten mad at him or done anything for all the other lies up to now and all the other acts of racism. There's an audience. They're just going to keep going with this. And, you know, the Murdochs don't seem to mind. They really don't seem to mind that he is peddling hate and conspiracy theory. You know, remember the show he did a couple of months ago in which he literally said that Biden is sending black helicopters out there to get people like you, and that the January 6th thing was a riot, was a false flag designed to call good Americans traitors and criminals. I mean, it's complete nonsense. But unfortunately, there's a market, and it's going to keep going. And I see him as being part of a wider movement in the Republican and conservative world towards greater and greater extremism. I think the theory I have is that after they kind of got away with January 6th, I mean, Trump wasn't impeached. Nobody lost their job over it. I mean, some people are going to jail, but in general, the big lie, everyone who perpetuated it, you know, now they're all together, working together, Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell back supporting Trump if he runs again, that after getting away with that, I think they felt even more liberated to be even more extreme. So now they attack Democrats for being pedophiles, which is complete bullshit and nonsense. They're out there, when they talk about banning abortion, they're now talking about banning abortion without any exceptions. They used to always make sure that rape, incest, life of the mother, so that they didn't look completely unreasonable. But now they're passing laws without that. They turned critical race theory into a moral panic. They're out there saying, if you can't deal medically with people who are transgender, that you go to jail if you do that. I mean, the extremism, and of course, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others running around at Nazi events and supporting QAnoners, and Trump doing the same. So the window, the Overton window, the goalposts of extremism in the last year, instead of ratcheting back after January 6th, have just gone further and further to the right into extremist territory.
Yeah, and it's there's really no words at this point other than to say, good for President Biden, who I understand is visiting Buffalo today, right? And he's going to do the political thing. He's going to go meet with the families of the victim. And 10 people, black, were killed by this crazy 18-year-old white supremacist, which, good for Joe Biden. He did something that Trump never would do. He's calling out white supremacy as poison, right? I mean, good for him in terms of that. But this is really no joke, especially, when you start to see, what's going on here. And I'll be very honest with you. I watched, Tucker Carlson, every now and then, because I watch it simply so that I could get a better understanding of, what's going on here, who's doing what, who's saying what, and so on. And I didn't hear Tucker Carlson mention the names of any of these 10 innocent black victims, lives taken, whether they are ages 20 to 86, taken from us simply because of the color of their skin. So before we move forward, David, I want to do something that Tucker Carlson either doesn't have the desire to do or the balls to do it. But let me tell you the names of these folks.
Yeah, let's
32-year-old Roberta Drury, 52-year-old Margus Morrison, 53-year-old Andre McNeil, 55-year-old Aaron Salter, 62-year-old Geraldine Talley, 65-year-old Celestine Cheney, 67-year-old Hayward Patterson, 72-year-old Catherine Massey, 77-year-old Pearl Young, and 86-year-old Ruth Whitfield. All right, those are the names of the people, Tucker, who were killed by this insanity that you foster on a daily basis. And as far as I'm concerned, the blood of these people are on his hands. They're on the hands of Rupert Murdoch and Fox News and all of these others. And while my heart goes out to them, and I'm sick and tired of seeing all the politicians jump onto the Twitter sphere or into this metaverse and say, prayers and sorrow for the families. Bullshit already. It's enough. And I know what it's like to have the legal right to carry a firearm. But I'll be very honest with you. I've never shot in my entire life an AR-15, nor do I think that I should ever shoot one unless I'm actually in combat.
Yeah. I have a question for you because, I'm working on a book that I'm finishing up about the history of the Republican Party's interaction with extremism, bigotry, paranoia, and conspiracy theory, going back to McCarthyism up until literally today. And I was looking at the Charlottesville, episode in which Trump insisted more than once in saying, there are two sides to this, very fine people on the other side. The whole event there was organized by white nationalists. But he, said they have a point. We shouldn't take down these statues. These people are being, unfairly denigrated. And, when you testified in Congress, you called Trump a racist. And I was wondering, when he was thinking about running through the birther bullshit And, beginning of the 2016 campaign, when he's out there talking about, how you people are being screwed and they're taking away our heritage and all that. How much of that, in his view, in his thinking, is just explicitly racist?
Well, look, with Trump, everything has to be on an ad hoc basis, right? What I try to do in my book, Disloyal, and what I try to do here on this Mea Culpa podcast movement is I try to use anecdotes of things that occurred, which shows the racist, the sexist, the misogynistic, the xenophobic, the homophobic, the Islamophobic, the anti-Semitic comments that Donald Trump makes. It's not as if he's going to walk around using the N-word. It's not that he's going to turn around and talk to you, David, about the great replacement conspiracy and so on. But there are things that come out in his statements, in the things that he says and does. For example, Charlottesville. For example, his refusal to denounce David Duke. His stupid-ass comment after you saw these folks walking down the street screaming, Jews will not replace us, something reminiscent of the Third Reich. I'm curious as to how he's going to ultimately one day explain that to Kushner's kids, right? His grandchildren who are modern Orthodox Jewish. It's these statements that he makes that gives you the ability to point your finger, as I did, and just say, Donald, you're just a fucking racist. So acknowledge it and admit it. But he doesn't walk around saying it so that you can point it. You need to use the anecdotes. And that's one of the reasons why I ultimately decided to write Disloyal, and that I decided to create this podcast and to put myself out there as I do, whether it's the newspapers, with journalists like yourself, or in the press.
Yeah, it seems to me that, of course, he took over the party. Everyone supported him, even when he even when they accused him of being racist. Republicans accused him of being racist when he attacked Judge Curiel for ruling against him in Trump University.
Because he was Mexican, that's right.
Because he said he was Mexican of heritage, but he grew up and was born in Indiana.
Why does that matter?
Yeah. So, but he really has created this tremendous permission structure. And when I look at what's happening with, critical race theory and other things, and now, the replacement theory from Tucker, it just, he did this, he succeeded, he became president, didn't win a second time, but it just is granting the whole right and a lot of people in the Republican Party to be kind of as racist as they want to be. And, attend Nazi events and, hang out with white nationalists like Nick Fuentes. It just, rather than looking at the Trump years and the January 6th event as something, that the Republicans and conservatives should, to reevaluate, it just really seems to, in Spinal Tap terms, turn the amplifier up to 11.
Yeah, exactly. Look, there's so much more than just Donald Trump's stupid comments, his racist comments. There's more to even than Tucker Carlson. We're now seeing somebody who's the third highest ranking Republican out there. 2 days after the shooting, Elise Stefanik here of New York is out there and continuing to promote this great replacement conspiracy. And look, I don't understand why anybody would vote for her. I don't understand why they don't throw her out as a vote of no confidence. I mean, the nonsense that they are all promoting. Well, what did you expect was going to happen when you promote this sort of crazy ideology that, it's really the Jews that they believe are bringing in the immigrants and promoting interracial marriage to suppress whites? Well, with all due respect to whoever it is that wrote that fucking manifesto in the first place, Jews are for the most part white. Now, of course, there are Ethiopian Jews and there are black Jews and so on. I get that. But for the most part, Jews identify as white. So the notion that these white nationalists ascribe to this massive multi-generational plot by the Jews to destroy the United States of America, right, with this crazy conspiracy, theory, it's nonsense. But Donald will take that crazy conspiracy if he believes that he can use it for his own benefit and continue to promote it, as is Tucker Carlson. By the way, Tucker's not doing it because I don't give a shit what anybody says to me. Tucker's not an idiot. In fact, he's a pretty bright guy. I've sat and I've spoken to him on several occasions. He's not stupid by any stretch of the imagination. I believe that he ascribes to this nonsense simply because it continues to feed him and feed him well with the $30 million a year, contract with Fox News and so on. I don't think he believes any of the shit that comes out of his mouth. I just think that he's doing it because it financially benefits him.
And what we see from him, and what we even see from Trump sometimes, it can seem exceptional. But I'm thinking of the 2018 midterms, and before the 2018 midterms, not just Trump, but a lot of Republicans started talking about the migrant caravan. Remember, it was coming from Central America through Mexico. It was full.
And they're coming to get you. They're coming to get you, David.
Coming to get you and getting terrorists. But one aspect of that, and Trump did this, Matt Gaetz did this, others did this, was that the caravan was being paid and supported by liberals, including George Soros. So you talk about like this anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Trump and Gaetz and others are passing, that the Jews are out there giving money to these immigrants who are, migrants who are heading towards the Mexican border to come here to replace you, to commit crimes because they're terrorists. And what happens? Well, the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh was done by a fellow who was, had in his screed complained about the caravans. And then there was also the bombing, the mail bombings, a guy sending bombs through the mail to the Clintons and Obamas and to George Soros, a guy named Cesar Sayoc, who was worried about the caravan and obviously, the Jewish connection there. So we've already seen, before, Tucker's latest screeching about white replacement theory, that similar racist notions and conspiracy theories have been advanced not just by talking heads, but by Trump and other Republicans, and it has led to acts of violence. The Walmart shooter in El Paso in 2019, he was, believed that immigrants are being brought in to replace white people and to dilute the power of Republicans and conservatives. So this stuff has been going on for years, and it has already led to violence before this dreadful attack on Buffalo. I hate to say this, it's just not new.
No, sadly, it's not. It's just another racist mass shooting by a deranged individual. In this case, just this 18-year-old white male. I wanted to ask you this question because I often think about things. Sometimes I don't want to say them because they're somewhat radical as well. But do you believe that capital punishment for something as heinous as what this kid did would be a good deterrent? And I'm not talking about just a nice execution where they put you to sleep. I'm talking about almost like going to Gilead, right? In The Handmaid's Tale. And I'm talking about like legitimately, like maybe hang them or something in Madison Square Garden or someplace up in Buffalo, right? Do you think that something that drastic is what's needed in order to stop, these people who become infatuated with this concept of these mass shootings, especially in the fact that it's racially driven? Just watching him sit there in the courtroom, I would have rather see them just hit him across the side of the head with an old fucking phone book. You remember those days, right? Just something so that the next kid or the next person says, you know what? I don't want to be stripped butt ass naked and hung in the middle of the square, right? For everyone to see. Maybe I should put away that AR-15 and burn that 180-page manifesto. I don't know. I understand Michael, it's a radical concept and all, and it's not even that I really want to see something like this. I just want this shit to stop.
I get it.
I don't want to see another set of emoji hands together with another thoughts and prayers to the family. These families should not have to be going through the sorrow and the pain that they're going through.
Yeah, I understand the impulse, and if I thought this would work, I'd be somewhat more sympathetic. If we could trust the state, letting the state kill people and decide to do these things has all sorts of problems. And I think in general that in some, a lot of these cases we see these folks are willing to die, or they end up committing suicide themselves, and they want to be martyred. I just don't know if it would end up being the deterrent.
This kid didn't want to be martyred. This kid did not want to be a martyr. That's certainly for sure. And you know what my biggest fear is? That ultimately he'll get out, and then he'll be like that kid Rittenhouse hanging out at Mar-a-Lago, being a fucking celebrity superstar.
This guy's not getting out. I mean, Dylan Roof, there are certain, Mark David Chapman, John Hinckley, there are certain crimes they just don't get out. So he won't get out. And the white nationalists out there may make him into a martyr for them, but he's David, you bring up a good point. Let me follow it up with a different question to you.
Sure. Because you've been in journalism a long time. In all your years working in the press and reporting on American politics, has the threat of white nationalism ever been so great? And in your opinion, why are so many Americans embracing it?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I remember being in Chicago in November 2008, and Obama wins, and I'm in the press room with a lot of journalists, some working for places like Mother Jones, me, and New Yorker, and others who are just working, for more mainstream conventional places. And there were, tears in a lot of people's eyes that, that America had done something different. We had elected a Black person. And I remember in those days, even, some Republicans saying, I didn't support him. I don't believe him on policy, but there is something positive about this. We have a history of racism in this country, and electing a Black man to the job, has value and is important. And it felt like we were making what you could call progress, right? We, for the country, I actually didn't think that he would win until the end, but, up for much of the campaign, because I didn't think enough Americans would vote for a Black man. I just thought racism was too deep-seated in our country. But what we've learned since then is that the racism in America is just incredibly intertwined with our roots. And, and even though I think America got to the point where a lot of people realized it was at least impolite to act and talk racist in public, it was still widely felt in a very tribal sense that, there are Blacks out there getting, or brown people out there getting something that we're not getting, or the Democrats or others are just helping them, not helping us. A lot of polling shows that these are some very significant sentiments. They were not majority sentiments, but 20, 30, 40% sentiments, right? And, it was enough for Trump to, exploit this first with birtherism, and then with his campaign in 2016, to get enough of a base to defeat other Republicans. And, and by succeeding, showing people that you could get by and you could say things. I mean, Rush Limbaugh preceded him in a way in doing this, with racist and comments that, and in comments that were arguably or racist tinged, and for an audience, and fighting back on what you call political correctness. And so there was, over the last 20, 30 years, you've had this contradiction with racism receding in some ways, but also becoming deeper in some ways and moving forward. But I think, with Trump, there was never a candidate that was as explicit about it. Even when Richard Nixon was playing a major candidate, of course, it was George Wallace and Lester Maddox and others. But even when Richard Nixon was playing the Southern strategy, it was often in coded language, right? And even Reagan talked about states' rights. Trump gets out there in the 2020 campaign and talks about how they're destroying, to an all-white audience, they're destroying our heritage when they're taking down Confederate statues. That's the thing. They're not taking down statues of Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. They're taking down Confederate statues, and he says they're destroying our heritage.
Yeah. I mean, he's just.
I mean,
embrace his inner stupidity. But even when I was in Otisville, right, and even prior to that, I used to get into arguments with people over the fact that whether I like Trump or I dislike Trump, I support my president regardless of party affiliation. Now, that doesn't mean that I want him to run again in 2020, or I was not ecstatic that he lost, or that I don't want to see him run again, which I don't believe he will in 2024. But the notion that you want your president to fail, to me, is stupid, because if your president fails, so does the country. But talking about stupid people, you wrote an excellent piece in your newsletter, Our Land, about Rudy Giuliani's odious appearance on The Masked Singer and the role that television is playing to whitewash the images of seriously dangerous politicians. Can you do me a favor? Can you explain how and why we're amusing ourselves to autocracy?
Yeah, I mean, there was a great book that came out in the 80s by cultural critic named Neil Postman, and it was called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And mainly he looked at TV news and how, with music and with commercials and with soft features that, take away from, the true issues of the day, and appearing on a passive medium such as TV is, that, we had turned news into entertainment. And so it wasn't about how to think about the world and make the world better or have honest policy debates. It was really about being amused, being entertained. And I read that book many years ago. I knew Neil, he passed away sometime, and always thought he was a very smart person, and this was a very unique take. And this was before cable TV, before the internet, before 100,000 different stations and everything else. So he was really on top of this stuff. And if you look at Rudy Giuliani appearing on The Masked Singer, here's a guy who tried to help overthrow the constitutional order of the United States. He did it again and again and again, and he helped work up people who then attacked the Capitol, and law officers were beaten. One died the next day, several committed suicide afterwards. And, our government came close to being toppled. I don't think that's an exaggeration. But here he is, this is what he's done most recently. And yet network executives come along and say, hey, isn't this fun? We can put on The Masked Singer, turn him into this cuddly celebrity who can even make fun of himself and dress up as a jack-in-the-box and just pretend that what he did before was just part of the larger entertainment world. And if we can't sanction, if we can't disassociate people attacking, our government and trying to overturn the election results and subvert the basic fundamentals of our democracy, if we can't at least say to them, you know what, we can't lock you up because of the way our laws are, but we're not going to invite you to dinner. We're not going to have drinks with you. We're not going to pal around with you. We're not going to make believe that you're an okay guy who goes along with a good joke. Then we're kind of fucked. We're just, if there are no barriers, and this is what we've seen with the whole thing of January 6th, with Trump and the big lie, other Republicans and conservatives supporting that big lie. Think of Matt Schlapp, who runs the American Conservative Union, going to Nevada and claiming that there are 9,000 illegal votes when there were none. I mean, maybe 30, and just saying stuff. And he, gets fact checked and then, pants and fire, all that sort of stuff. Michael Flynn calling for a military coup, martial law, everything anything that Marjorie Taylor Greene has said. And there is no punishment. There is no price to be paid. And in fact, in Rudy's case, he gets this nice reward. It's an honor. I'd like to be on The Masked Singer, if anyone out there is listening. It's just kind of fun. And if there's no price to be paid, then it will happen again. And next time it will be worse. So that's why, so when I say, I took the title of the book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, and just switched it to Amusing Ourselves to Autocracy, because the show is celebrating and honoring a guy who was part of an authoritarian effort to end legitimate democracy in the United States. But,
the fact that he's just a total ass clown with his Four Seasons bullshit, with his hair dye dripping into his face, and yet they give him the stage, to do it. Shame on them. But since we're talking about free speech, let me ask you this question then, David. There's a whole free speech now component to the current right-wing narrative. I mean, for example, Elon Musk supposedly wanting to buy Twitter. For what purpose? So he himself can restore free speech back to the platform. Now, what do they mean by free speech? Is it like speech without moderation, or is it speech without fact-checking? Because you and I have had conversations about that, over the years. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, free speech doesn't mean that that we're forced to listen to racism, anti-Semitism, or just stupid nonsense. Twitter is run privately. Mother Jones, your podcast, we all get to decide who we're going to let talk and how we're going to let talk. Now, in general, I like the notion of a free-flowing debate and letting people fight things out. But at the same time, there are libel laws, and we see that there is an impact when people get out there and talk about conspiracy theories. It motivates people to shoot up folks. And so there's free speech comes with a degree of responsibility. If you're creating, Twitter is like a giant living room. People come and they, you interact, you talk about a TV show, politics, sports, and you share videos of monkeys juggling frogs. Look at that. Isn't that fun? It's like this giant living room. Well, in your house, you have a say over what goes on in your living room and what the rules are and what people are allowed to do. Does one person come in and just get to shout over and over and over again and then say, things that are racist or hate speech? So, I'm for, making sure that, that we have discourse that is more civil than not. And I would err on the side of more latitude than not. But that doesn't mean that anyone gets to say anything that they want at any time. And what's happened is that, and this is the whole issue that comes up with people on the right complaining about political correctness. Political correctness is often just, hey, you can't go out there and be a racist asshole. And they say, oh, you're trying to police what I say. Well, actually, kind of saying that if you're going to be a racist asshole, then I don't want you to do it here. I don't want you to do it in my classroom. I don't want you to do it in my platform. You can, tell you gather your friends and do it on your front porch. But, free speech, is not the only value that we have in a society when it comes to, communication. So so if Elon Musk wants to come out and say, I want to, give Donald Trump back Twitter, I mean, it's not what I would do. I understand the intellectual argument there, but to me, that's sort of like a red herring. The real issue is, are you going to allow completely unmoderated talk? Will you allow, racists and anti-Semites and other hate folks to have a larger than life position on Twitter? What do your algorithms do? This is a big issue on Facebook. A lot of the most hateful speech or the most radical speech sometimes gets the most play because of computer algorithms. I think Facebook has the right to say, we're going to dial back on that. And, and if you, and it's not a matter of free speech if you feel your racism doesn't get a bigger audience.
Look, I'm all twisted up on this topic because I'm a big Elon Musk, fan. I think he's like the Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein of our generation. And I have no issue if he wants to put Trump back onto Twitter, if he even wants to buy it. I'm not even sure if he ever really wanted to buy it as much as, maybe you just want to make a couple more $1 billion on, buying and selling the stock of it, which of course, he has a big enough share. I'm not 100% certain, but where I have a problem with this whole issue of free speech, I would like to see the United States adopt the defamation rules, the laws that they have in the UK, where the loser pays everybody's bills. Because when I was reading it, it kind of gave me a flashback to 1987, and you'll remember this, when the Raymond Donovan, which is funny, right? Ray Donovan was charged with having mob connections. He was I think, Secretary of Labor, appointed under Ronald Reagan, and then he came out after that it was disproven that it was wrong. And I have a real sensitivity to this, right? Which office do I go to get my reputation back? Right. And you could spend, as I try to do, every single day for the rest of my life, and there will still be people who hate me because of shit that was written about me, inaccurate lies, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, because of my connection and because of my tenure with Donald Trump. So I get the point of allowing Elon Musk. He wants to buy Twitter and put Donald back. Interestingly enough, Donald took a pop shot at him. I don't even want to go back on Twitter. I have my own social media platform, which of course, folks, doesn't fucking work because it's run by another scumbag that never worked either, Devin Nunes, right? And they have maybe 15 or 20 people who are on the site, and let them sit and let them talk to each other, because it's either they talk to them there or they just call each other up on the cell phone. This is just a joke, but using Ray Donovan as sort of the example, that's one of the reasons why there has to be some form of moderation going on here. Otherwise, where do you go? What office do I call to get my reputation back?
I mean, the interesting thing about social media platforms are, if you want to have it without, they want to have, some people, like if this is indeed Elon Musk's position, and it's really kind of hard to know what he says he's for free speech, but it's unclear what that means. But then they don't want moderation, but they also then say you can't sue us because we're not a publisher. We're not responsible for what appears on our site. There's a section in the telecommunications law that people talk about changing. So they want the ability to not be held accountable and to do whatever the heck they want. And that, to me, that's what a good corporatist will do. They want to make as much money and have as big an audience without having any responsibility for what their product brings.
No, it all becomes profit. Nothing but profit.
Yeah, I think Elon, as we're talking today, it looks like Elon Musk wants to get out of the deal, and it will cost him $1 billion to get out of the deal. So
Big deal. He made that an interest already.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's yeah, I can't really figure out what his game is here, but I think we just have a larger problem over the quality of discourse in general in this country, and the ability of disinformation and misinformation to play an equal role, or even sometimes greater role than good information. And as a working journalist who spends a lot of time and effort, not just popping off and putting out false information, I see there is a strong imbalance here, and I don't know what the long-term answer is right here. But when you look at how Donald Trump has used disinformation, and a lot of Republicans, and the big lie and so on and so forth, how do we, as a society and a community, whether we let people say whatever they want to say on Twitter or not, how do we guard against?
I don't know. We certainly allow them to get rallies going, and to get licensed for those rallies. But I want to ask you this then. Recently, a delegation of Republicans led by Moscow Mitch McConnell visited Zelensky in Ukraine to show their support. I mean, great. But Republican Rand Paul just held up the quick passage of the $40 billion aid package to Ukraine, right? So what? The GOP gives, with one hand, and then they take with the other. What's the schism going on inside the GOP between pro and anti-Russian factions?
Well, this is very interesting, because it doesn't split evenly, like, one side's this, one side's that. It's sort of like different currents, right? All kind of swirling around. I mean, there's, Rand Paul, who is, a pretty strong conspiracy theorist himself, has always been against internationalism and getting involved overseas, and has decried globalists and groups like the Trilateral Commission for plotting to have one world government and take over the United States. And so he doesn't like us getting involved elsewhere. And then you look at someone, we go back to Tucker Carlson, who before the war was saying that he was rooting for Putin, that he didn't care about Ukraine. He didn't want the U.S. to be involved. Why should we be involved in another country, even if it's fighting for democracy against Russia? And there's been a real strong pro-Putin part of the Republican Party, led foremostly by Donald Trump himself. But at the this white nationalist Nazi conference that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Representative Paul Gosar attended a few months ago, they were, the Nazis, these white nationalist Americans were shouting, Putin, Putin, Putin. So there's been this component on the right. And also remember Steve Bannon before the war saying he was rooting for Putin because Putin's not woke and there are no rainbow flags in Moscow. So, Putin isn't like in favor of gay rights. So you have all these swirling currents on the right that bleed into parts of the Republican Party that are pro-Putin because he's against Biden and he's against gay rights and, all these different reasons. And then you have some isolationist tendencies on the right. It can go back to the 30s with Rand Paul and others, some of it being more conspiratorial, and they don't want to get involved. And then you have these Republicans who traditionally have been national security hawks, but under Trump, they didn't know which way to turn because, he was and he wasn't, depending on the time of day. And so finally, they've, and after making excuses for the Russian attack, some of them have decided that Zelensky's okay. And they see that, here he's 80%, 90% a popular figure, right? And then they go there and they attack Biden, saying Biden's not doing enough. When it seems to me, Biden's done a pretty good job up to now.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that.
Supporting
on
Zelensky without
soon.
Getting us into the war itself. It still, may happen, but so they're trying to, after making excuses for Trump and his, love affair with Putin, for years. Now they're trying to show they're anti-Putin, even after they went to Moscow. Some of them went to Moscow on July 4th. It's
You mean to Ukraine?
No, I meant went to Moscow a couple of years ago on July 4th. The seven Republicans remember that. So this is if you put this out on a chart with a wire diagram, it would make what's her name, Matheson in Homeland dizzy with how they're spinning so quickly in different positions.
So David, let me ask you this then, because Trump is endorsing a whole slew of unqualified far-right and QAnon adjacent candidates in the midterms. Now, assuming that a lot of these candidates win their primaries, how do you see them measuring up against Democrats in November?
Yeah, it depends. And there are some places where he's endorsing people where the Republican is likely to be the winner just because of how the district or the area is gerrymandered. He's endorsed Wendy Rogers, who is a crazy QAnonish state senator in Arizona, who's running for re-election, who was just a couple of days ago was putting out anti-Semitic tweets. And if she, wins the primary, she will, in her district, she's likely to win. And he's done this with other state officials. But then if you look at, say, the Senate race, he in Pennsylvania, which is happening as we talk. And so by the time this comes out, people will know. But there he endorsed Dr. Oz. That race, whoever wins on the Republican side, and all the Republicans claimed they were Trumpies, right? Even the ones he didn't endorse. They all said they were even more Trumpy than Oz. So they're all Trumpy. One of them marched in January 6th, and she might win. But whoever gets out of that will be up against a likely strong Democratic contender, right? So in a place like that, there'll be, a far out Trump person versus a mainstream, or maybe progressive Democrat. So it really depends on the area. But, if you look at people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who he endorsed in 2020, she ran in Georgia in a district in which, I don't know what the numbers are, but it was predominantly Republican. So, and she's likely to win again. Lauren Boebert, again, a former QAnon supporter in Colorado. So I think it would be interesting to see, if some of these folks go down, just to what degree his endorsement has power. If you look at the Georgia race between Perdue and Kemp, right? But I think he has just really embraced some of the most extreme people out there, including some QAnon big lie supporters who are running for Secretary of State to be in charge of the election system in a lot of states. And some of those
talk about putting the fox in the
in the hen house,
right?
And I think some of those people may end up winning, in certain states. So it gets back to my earlier point that I think the Republican Party and the conservative movement post January 6th has just become more and more extreme.
Yeah. Look, so I got to just jump into Mehmet Oz because I believe that anyone who votes for Mehmet Oz is actually voting for a complete hypocrite, because we've already stated on this program, as I have on many others, Donald Trump is an Islamophobe. There's no doubt about that. All right. I've heard him say it. We've seen his actions. And yet Mehmet Oz, who we'll talk about on his television show, that he's into transcendental meditation. He's Turkish American, but he identifies as a Muslim. Now, he doesn't practice the Quran the way that a practicing Muslim does. He believes in something called Sufism, which is it's like mystical Islamic, sect, and very much like the Kabbalah, right? But it's instead of Judaism, it's Islam. And the fact that he would accept the endorsement from somebody who thinks that he's less than a human being, right? To me, makes it so repugnant that I don't know how he accepted, Donald's, endorsement at all. Because again, to me, it's just hypocritical. Is it worth winning to sacrifice your personal beliefs and your ideology? And don't give me this horse shit, one television jerk off to another, right? Meidas is exactly the type of person that not only does Donald Trump despise, but the same as this kid that just went out and shot up, the grocery store in Buffalo.
Yeah, well, I think, you asked that question, about what you give up in terms of principle. I think you can ask that throughout the Republican Party now, whether it's, it's something as personal as this instance, or just in terms of policy, the family values party and movement, accepting Trump, talking about personal responsibility, the biggest liar I think who's ever served in the White House, whether it's, policy issues on trade and other matters, whether, accepting him when he was defending Putin and claiming there was no attack on the 2016 election. I mean, again and again and again and again and again and again and again, Republicans have had to basically jettison anything that they previously said they cared about to be, on the right side of Donald Trump. And you even saw that, after January 6th, Kevin McCarthy came out and said it was Trump's responsibility. It was terrible. Mitch McConnell did the same thing, but they wouldn't vote for or support impeachment. And then within weeks, they were back to, I'll support Trump if he runs again. And Mitch McConnell called Trump responsible for what happened on January 6th. And then, literally 12 days after he did that, 12 days.
Yeah, Mark Meadows did the exact same thing.
He said he would support Trump.
So David, so let me ask you this then, David, right? Because it's not just Republicans that have problems when it comes to all this. It's the Democrats as well, right? I mean, while they're not jumping on the side of Donald Trump, there are plenty that say stupid shit as well. But the thing that I want to ask you is the mainstream media just can't seem to say anything good about President Biden. Whether it's going to be Afghanistan, whether it's COVID, whether it's Ukraine, they just refuse to say anything positive about President Biden. I mean, for God's sakes, he's fucking sinking in the polls, and the GOP attacks him for everything from baby formula shortage to the downturn of the stock market. I mean, how much is Biden actually responsible for any of this stuff? And how much is just negative media messaging and right-wing propaganda? Because I think that we will all acknowledge the Democrats are really fucking lousy at messaging.
Yes. Yeah, I wrote a piece about that in my newsletter a couple of days ago.
I know, I read it. Yeah,
people can go to davidcorn.com to sign up. They are bad at messaging. And what you have sort of two, like, so let's look at this as like a triangle, so three forces, right? You have the Democrats, party in power, Biden in the White House. That's one group of people, one force. You have call it the conventional mainstream media, and then you have the Republican/conservative movement. So Republican/conservative movement is out there literally every day saying the Democrats are destroying the United States. I mean, I get the emails from Trump every day. The radical far left socialists, they want to, not that they're doing it accidentally, they want to destroy America. And they're doing this, they're plotting, they're doing it through inflation, they're doing it through critical race theory. They did it in Afghanistan. They didn't care about Afghanistan before, but whatever the problem is, they find a way to say the Democrats are doing this on purpose to destroy America, and so send us money, and it's terrible, and they attack everything, baby formula, so on. And then you have the mainstream media, and their basic default position is oppositional confrontation. And so, reporting on what's going right, getting vaccines out and all that sort of stuff, isn't as juicy or sexy as, oh my God, inflation. People are upset and mad. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about inflation today? And so, you have that current with the right-wing current, which is, demonization and terrible end is near sort of stuff. And so you have, and they kind of play off each other a bit. They're different messages, but they're adjacent. And then you have the Democrats, and they're fighting amongst themselves, or they were before, about what to do in Congress. Biden, and this was the same issue with Obama. They get bogged down with the details of governing and trying to make things work. It's a hard job, and they don't spend as much time messaging. Where all Trump did, he didn't care about governing. He just wanted a message, and the message was always, "I'm great, everything's good. This is better than it was," and the Democrats are evil. And so Biden's out there, and he's not telling enough of a story about the plans that the Republicans have to subvert democracy. He's trying to address people's concerns about inflation, which now is the number one issue in the polls, when he is limited in what he can do. The economy heated up after being in COVID recession. And it's like the economy is kind of like one of those big, oil tankers or something. You can't, you can nudge it one way or the other, but once it starts going in a direction, it can't turn on a dime. So we got people back to work, which is good. And employment's still low, and people got back to work. Some people didn't even want to go back to work, but people got back to work. And yes, things cost more now, and that's terrible. But that's kind of the balance here that's hard to weigh out. It's a tough job, and it can't change immediately. So, we live in a society of instant gratification. And so people jump on the president. They do this with Republicans in power too. And then then this is
not
used.
Not the same way. I mean,
No.
Joe Biden sneezes. It's all of a sudden it's his death, right? I mean, I hear more people tell me that it's not even Joe Biden who's running the country. It's Barack Obama. And I look at them and I say, for a smart guy, not only are you fucking stupid, but you're a racist too. And then they turn around and they say Afghanistan was a complete nightmare. Really? 125,000 people were safely evacuated from an area that has been in war for over 2 decades? Really? How about the fact that it wasn't Trump that's been trying to force people to get the vaccination? It's Joe Biden and the Biden administration. To the contrary, Trump was saying you don't need it. It's just a flu and everything. And now, of course, the gas prices, that's Biden's fault too.
I mean, this is, Michael, this is like, to me, this says it all. According to, a bunch of research, 400,000 Americans died a preventable death in COVID. And that was the number that came out like a year ago. By now it could be higher. 400,000 Americans died a preventable death. If we had had better policies, better messaging at the beginning of COVID, all things that could have been done. Now, we're not talking about things that were miracles. Almost 500,000 Americans, probably maybe even that many, would be alive. And Trump is responsible for this. And it's just
where is Jamie Harrison? Where are the Democrats? Say whatever you want about Ronna Romney McDaniel, but that.
Yeah, no, they're not.
But she follows the Trump playbook, and I know it because I helped write it. She follows it to the T. Right. And so, but you know what, David, as we're winding down the hour, I have one last question for you, because, I always heard, the Democrats, especially when Joe Biden made the move to nominate Kamala Harris for the vice presidency and so on, that the Democrats had a lot riding on Vice President Harris, basically emerging as the future of the party. And yet it seems like she's faded into the background because we hear almost nothing about her accomplishments in the press. Once again, it's the DNC as far as I'm concerned. People like you and me, we can't be the ones talking about it. You have to do more like the Republicans do. But my question to you is there a problem with the work Harris is doing? Or again, is it just a perception based on the media bias?
I have to say, on the question of Kamala Harris, I am totally flummoxed. I don't understand. I don't understand why we don't. I don't understand why we don't see her doing more and taking more credit and getting more positive coverage. I do. You mentioned Jamie Harrison and the DNC. One thing we've seen is that there are only a few people who get to who have a say in the overarching narrative, and the biggest person who gets to do that is the president. And Biden, and I'm not sure I'll fault him for this, but I'll say this as a point of analysis, has been trying to serve too many different narratives. He needs to, he's been trying to bring the country together. I'm the guy who wants to bring the country together. He, also wants to talk about his own accomplishments. He doesn't want to be too much of a showboat. And at the same time, he needs to let America know that the Republicans pose a threat to democracy if they're going to continue with big lie type of politics, and that they're the ones, you don't have dental coverage in your Medicare. There's a reason. It's the Republicans. You don't have universal pre-K. It's the Republicans. You don't have paid, family leave at workplace. It's the Republicans. We could have all these things if they just voted for them, because we Democrats are in favor of this. And this is what Harry Truman did in 1948 when he ran against the do-nothing Republicans of Congress, and he just made them the issue. But he had to say that over and over and over again, and he couldn't one day be a good cop, one day be a bad cop. And so I think and the Democrats need to also have money to amplify these messages from the president with paid media, with commercials in the right places, and good commercials with good narratives. And I just
all Joe Biden needs to do is go into the Rose Garden, make a statement. It's covered by every single news station,
right,
not just in the country, in the world. That's the greatest free press. Trump understood this.
Yes.
That the more outlandish shit that he would say, the more he get covered, the less he had to spend. Right? Because in those days, he was making the allegation that he was going to pay for everything, himself. But at the end of the day, I don't see the messaging coming out of Jamie Harrison the way I see it coming out of Ronna Romney McDaniel. I don't see the Democrats talking about critical race theory, a Republican, a GOP, ideology, the big lie, the January 6th insurrection, replacement theory. These are the things that they have to start hammering home, talking about who the next president is going to be. If it's Trump, it's 4 more years of trouble. If it's DeSantis, holy shit, strap in, folks, because this is going to get ugly.
Yeah, no, the Republicans have one play, which is attack, 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 attack. They can change the type of attack, from critical race theory to inflation, whatever, but it's just attack. They don't, they don't need to put out policy papers. Trump doesn't put out policy papers. It's just attack, 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 attack. The Democrats have to do 2 things, and that is govern and convince people that what they're doing is good, and they have to attack. Well, actually, they have to do 3 things, and they have to attack the Republicans back, and they have to defend themselves on the Republican attacks.
Yes.
So
yes.
I'm not saying it's impossible, but they need to do all 3 things at once. It's a juggling act that is hard to do. Bill Clinton was very good at doing this, which is why he got reelected. A lot of Democrats, Barack Obama got reelected, but he was not good at doing all of this. So that's the hard position they're in. And as I've written, if they don't figure out how to do this rather soon, by the time we get to the summer, they can expect to get clobbered in the midterms, and which, who knows what that sets up for 2024.
Yeah, no idea. But David, let me thank you again for your insight and for everything that you're doing to help keep this fight alive. I appreciate it and look forward to having you back on Mea Culpa real soon.
It's always good to talk to you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Be well, my friend.